When I first thought and heard I had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, it was quite a shock. I was only 51 at the time and really wasn't expecting a positive result.
I remember kind of a sinking feeling, and I was stunned, I think, really. I just didn't know what to say. I had heard of people getting cancer before, but it certainly had never happened to me, and I was in shock.
Well, fear and like a huge jolt.
A sense of shock, disbelief, and fear. All three wrapped up into one.
And then when it came time for my diagnosis, it did come as a surprise because I was being checked every year, not only with the rectal exam, but also with PSA, because my father had been diagnosed with prostate cancer, aggressive, and it had a very high PSA count. I was with him when he was diagnosed, and they told him that he had 3 to 6 months to live. And that was pretty devastating. So we talked. I told him how much I loved him, and told him I, probably hadn't told him enough, even though we were very close. So that was another moment of a lot of tears.
This is something I totally did not expect. The reason being is the fact that I had had 2 biopsies. The first biopsy, they could find no cancer cells. The second biopsy, they found 1 specimen with cancer cells. I was prepared to receive positive information the second time around. That didn't happen. So I was devastated.
My initial reaction was something else was wrong with my prostate. It wasn't cancer. So I didn't think very much about it, but then as I went through the various other tests, I guess the realization came gradually that I had cancer. And so it built up gradually. It wasn't something that hit me between the eyes.
When I got back out to my car, I just sat there for a few minutes and just sort of tried to, take deep breaths and calm myself down and rationalize it.
And then, as per my initial reaction, to me it was a challenge. So my reaction was, well, what do I have to do to get rid of this? And what are my chances of getting rid of it? That was my initial reaction.
The way I describe it to people is my worldview contracted from, I think most of us like to think maybe we have a 5-year kind of plan in our heads at any given time, in 5 years I'll be doing this, or in 5 years I'll be doing that, or I might retire or go to Europe or whatever. All of a sudden my worldview just sort of collapsed to what I call the next doctor's appointment.
How's my family going to handle this? What's my wife going to do and think?
I saw it as a challenge as opposed to a problem, and like most challenges in my life that I've been able to overcome, I thought this is just one more. It just happens to be a little more internalized than some of the external problems I've had to deal with in the past.
Basically sent me into a kind of a tailspin, I guess is what I would say. A complete tailspin of activity. Do we tell the kids? Do we not tell the kids? Do I tell my dad?
How long have I got to live? Those were some pretty major questions, as well as how bad is the cancer? I never even knew what a prostate was back then. And the only reason I had the test done is because a friend of ours, who was father of my wife's employer, he had his prostate done and had his PSA done and kept insisting that I have mine done. And it was through that insistence and my wife's prodding that I finally said to the doctor, look, this is my $25, because that's what it was back then, and I want to have this test done.
From the time I turned 50, my doctor, bless his heart, said, Mike, you've turned 50, and I want to start, you should have your blood tested for PSA. It's not covered by OHIP, it's an extra $30 out of your own pocket, but you should do it every year from now on. And he recommended that I do it, and I followed his advice. And you know what? It saved my life.
My doctor used the digital rectal exam and she said, I feel something and I'd like you to go and have that investigated. And so I otherwise wouldn't have known. So the diagnosis was picked up, or at least the early diagnosis was done by a routine DRE.
Well, the PSA was relatively a piece of cake because it was just a blood test. It became more important when we did the next PSA test and found out that my PSA had doubled rather quickly. That meant that the cancer, should it be there, they discovered, was aggressive.
We had the PSA results that showed us that we very likely had prostate cancer, given the family history. But we wanted to be sure, so we did the biopsy process.
I knew it had to be done because my PSA had risen. Still below normal, but had risen from 1 year to the next. So I knew that something had to be done to find out why it had risen, and whatever it was, let's do it.
As I really wasn't sure what the process was going to be. It was explained to me what I felt through medical terms, but through a layman's terms, I wasn't absolutely sure what this was all about.
When he diagnosed me, he told me I had prostate cancer, and he explained what that meant, and I had a decent idea since my father had prostate cancer. I would say 16 years previous to me being diagnosed, so I was aware of prostate cancer, and I was also aware that you could survive it.
I accepted it as routine. I had no problems accepting the various procedures you have to go through.
I accept the fact that I'm going through with this. But I sort of went in what I would consider to be somewhat of a numb state, because this is what I have to do. This is what needs to happen. So I trust the health and the caregivers. So consequently, this is how it is. So it's accepting in one sense of the word, but it's also numbing myself, in other words, my feelings or whatever, because this is what it is.
I would advise that to anyone who's going through this process, to bring their spouse, a significant other, brother, sister, somebody to help with the process, because it's there's a lot of information, there's a lot to be processed, a lot of thinking and a lot of knowledge that is being passed along by doctors and practitioners, and you really do need help with that. So don't try to do it yourself.
At the time I felt a little isolated. A little bit of a guinea pig, even though I wasn't the first through these things, but it was first for me. And certainly a little uncomfortable with some of the testing. I personally find the biopsy treatment or testing the worst that I went through. When they use that gun to take the little biopsy samples, it hurts. The more samples I take, the more you end up feeling sore. And I certainly came out feeling a very tender rear end for a good few hours later.
The digital exams I've been doing for a little while, so that wasn't a challenge. The biopsy was the biggest procedure. I had never had major surgery in my life. I had never had a biopsy, so I was told what I was going to experience. But during the actual biopsy, I would have to say that I had imagined it being on a scale from 1 to 10, 10 being, oh my goodness, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and 1 being a mosquito bite. I would have to say it was a 4 or 5. It was a very intrusive procedure, but not nearly as bad as I had envisioned in my mind from a pain standpoint. Yes, there was the after effects of the bleeding and so forth, and the pre-treatment to prepare myself for the biopsy. But the biopsy itself wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, so I was pleasantly surprised.
The first biopsy I had was extremely uncomfortable, extremely painful, and proved to be negative, ironically, after all that. The second biopsy I had, which was about 6 months later, because my PSA had continued to elevate, turned out to be positive, and it was a very positive experience. I had no discomfort. It was a different doctor who performed it, and it was just in and out of the hospital, boom, boom, no problems at all.
Beyond honest with you, I knew very little, if anything, about prostate and prostate cancer at the time I was diagnosed. So I guess my initial reaction after being told was really to start thinking of, okay, let me find out a bit more about this.
I needed to know the facts myself. Now, not everybody's like that. Some people accept what the first doctor tells them, and they go ahead with whatever that doctor recommends. That's just not me.
In order for someone to make a good decision with what I do during the day, they need good information. So I needed more information, and I chose not to be too afraid during the diagnosis process, because I knew I was going to receive more information, and I didn't know what stage I was in. So until I knew what stage, then I would be appropriately emotional.
I deal with the uncertainty by just trying to be strong and trying not to dwell on this thing of prostate cancer that came into my life.
I'm not one to scour down and pull back because of uncertainty. I try to find, okay, what are the pros, what's the probability of X, Y, or Z happening? And
I don't want to focus too much on it because, I mean, life's to be lived. And I may have prostate cancer, but I can still get, in a car accident and mangled like anybody else.
I try to eliminate it. I try to research what I'm uncertain about. I try to get facts around the particular situation that I'm dealing with, and then try to eliminate as much of the uncertainty as I can. Typical engineer.
The other things that made me feel better was just the support, from the people I'm closest to, just in talking with them, they're all encouraging me and telling me, they knew I could beat it and go get them, kind of thing, right? So that helped. That means a lot.
Well, the first person I told, and in fact I didn't actually have to tell, was my wife. She was actually in the room with me when I received the diagnosis from the urologist oncologist. And so having her there to at least hold my hand or give me a pat on the shoulder, that was really a big moment in my life.
And actually, the prostate support group was one of the best. That's how I ended up at Credit Valley. Was I called the number for the Oakville, Mississauga prostate support group line, and I was had a great chat with the moderator at that time, and he sent me off to see the urologist in Credit Valley.
And I'm telling you, that was very helpful in having the support group tell me what to expect.
But I didn't want to, sort of go alarming people that were closest to me. So basically, I phoned my kids, and of course my girlfriend at the time, and I told them, but I told them in with as much of an upbeat, positive attitude as I could.
We had a little family council and said, okay guys, Dad's got a problem, here it is, and here's what we're going to do about it. And from that moment on, both my son and daughter were extraordinarily supportive. And both emotionally and physically, in terms of sending me funny cards and getting me a T-shirt that said life's good, the glass is half full, that sort of thing. And they just kept doing little things to buoy my spirits up.
The church that I attend and also work, so there was a spiritual community there, but also more or less the church community, I guess, more than anything. Plus also some very close friends. They were the ones that actually helped me the most.
Telling my wife about the diagnosis, and my kids were younger, so what could I tell them? I didn't want to scare them. I didn't want them to walk around me with eggshells. So they were younger, so I used my employee assistance program at work to talk to a counselor to get an idea of how much information I should give to the children, and also that my wife, she's going to be a soldier, she's going to support me, but she's also feeling things, and to give her options. So Wellspring for her as well. So she had an option if she wanted to speak to somebody. I gave her those resources. She had also the employee assistance program. So I wanted to know how to deal with that. And I kind of did that in the first 24 hours of diagnosis. So I moved really fast, and Wellspring was really responsive.
I started telling my colleagues at work and clients and anybody else who would listen, complete strangers in some cases, kept telling them about it because it was somewhat purgative for me. It was getting something off my chest that I could have simply internalized and kept totally close to myself, or might make it my own problem totally. I started that process about probably 3 or 4 days after I was diagnosed. First of all, I went around every male I met, whether I knew them well or didn't know them well, told them, I don't care how old you are, get your PSA done so you have a base level. If you're not getting it done, get it done. If you don't go for an annual physical, do it. As unpleasant as the DRE may seem to be.